So you are a company that's using voice analysis to decode human emotions and behavior traits. You apparently have focused the application currently in the recruiting and HR space, helping companies go beyond resume to evaluate things like soft skills and culture fit. Today, I really want to dive deeper on how all this started, the challenges you have faced along the way, and the lessons you have learned along the way as well. From your website, I've seen that your team has accumulated more than a decade of experience in voice AI. Could you give us a background a bit about yourself? What was your professional, even educational background, and even your team as well? And how did you guys transition into the voice space?
Thanks for that question. So first of all, I'm relatively younger. I come from a background in electronics engineering, so that's a lot of signal processing, electronics, and all that stuff. In terms of the team, actually, what happened is that Adam started or had a background in voice technology from way before, like over actually multiple decades. He was part of the team that built the first portable reading system for the blind, for example, voice-based technologies for the Arizona government, stuff like that. So he had this footing in voice technology space. On top of that, voice XML was a thing. It's not used as much now. Relatively speaking, it's an ancient technology, right? But he was one of the first pioneers of that. So Echo, as a consequence, was almost a natural evolution of that process. I joined Echo about 3 years ago. I kind of joined the team as a sort of a, how should I say this, almost a juxtaposition of a technical lead and a business development lead. And as it happened, basically over the years, I shifted into this CTO role, where I now manage a team of over 9 developers, actually. That would be researchers, ML engineers, and actual developers who put the app together. In terms of how I kind of contribute to this, obviously, I do have a background in signal systems, electronics engineering, which are pivotal areas, right? But more importantly, I think my other set of experiences was participating in a lot of startup competitions back in my college days. Managed to even go to the semifinals of the Hult International Prize. So that managerial aspect, I really think helps me a lot in this particular sense, right? Kind of having that technological background and bringing that to the forefront when managing a team and building a product to market.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
You mentioned that you joined the company 3 years ago. So how old is the company now?
The company is also almost close to 4 years now. So about a year after the company was formed is when I joined.
Right, right. You joined still relatively early, so considered
Mhm.
part of the founding team. All right. And I know that in Adam's the kind of response to our questionnaire, he mentioned that reliably labeled data, especially voice data, is really hard to find in your space. So how did your company solve this problem? And do you see the situation shifted over the past few years? For example, I could imagine with the mass use of OpenAI and with all kinds of AI app built on top of OpenAI in the past few years, maybe the availability of voice AI becomes kind of better compared to a few years back. What's your take on that?
Mm. That's a wonderful question. So first of all, I do agree with Adam or what he said essentially. It is an insanely difficult task, right? Just a bit of background. We were lucky enough that Adam had started working with a few partners and he had that background. So we were already working with a corpus of data and some technology built on it when we started essentially. But to the core crux of the challenge is that it's even with things like OpenAI, which I'll get to, right? And the advent of more voice in tech altogether, everything from what Amazon started with Alexa, Siri, Apple Siri, and all of that stuff. It still doesn't bridge the gap because when you're looking at actual labeled data, especially in our case, how do you kind of correlate it with things like just a simple example, a Meyer-Briggs inventory? It's a very common sort of inventory, 16 personalities. But then you need to also have the data of the people. So let's say a multi-ethnic, a multiracial, a multi-gendered sort of a data sample set. And on top of that, their results on those inventories. That is where the core of the challenge lies. It's relatively easy to go to a lab or relatively easy to go to a group of students and collect their data, but that often kind of skews your models in a certain way. So that's the biggest challenge here. Again, as I said, we have been lucky enough to have something to build off of. And then we use some machine learning techniques to improve that much more. And now we are at a place where it's also easy for us to collect data because we already have something. And when we're doing interviews, when we're speaking to people, all of that voice data, of course, with the permission and consent of users, are getting taken in as a part of improving the models. Coming to the second part of your question, which is very interesting, is that I'd say the technological space has opened up more, partially, definitely thanks to OpenAI and these players kind of integrating voice, because voice has almost fallen to the wayside, honestly, over the last 5 or 6 years. It has suddenly come back into the fray. People have started becoming more accepting. But the challenge there is it's mostly artificial voice, right? So
Mm.
that is something you can't really correlate to human emotions, soft skills, behavior. So that's a different domain altogether. There are use cases there, detecting those, deepfake detection, anti-fraud, blah, blah, blah. That's a different domain. So the challenge still remains. But what is good and what is changing, I had finished with this, is that there is more acceptance now and people are more open, combined with the fact that there is a wider availability of data. It makes building models relatively easier and hopefully easier down the line.
Would you say when 5 years down the road, more artificial voice kind of flooded the market, there will be proper mark to the audience, which are the artificial ones and which are the real ones?
That's one of the core areas we are trying to really focus at as a side note, kind of
Mm,
differentiating between what's artificial and what's real, right? We have, or we had actually achieved very good accuracy even 6 months back in detecting artificial voice. And with the change of technology, we are again trying to improve our model so we stay at the like very top of detecting artificial voice. But that is a problem that we intend to address, and I think other companies will also start stepping up. Because number
mm.
one, most people are still not too used to artificial content or voice. And more importantly, is that it almost muddies the water between what's real, what's not, which is a huge problem.
And over time, the quality of artificial voice would improve to make it less
Mhm.
detectable, right? To make it more real.
Absolutely. Yes,
Um,
I'll give you an example actually. Even today, emotion, again, which is a core area of our focus, is getting integrated more and more into this AI voices. Go back 6 months. This is a small time frame. This wasn't a part of OpenAI's or Anthropic's or Google's kits. Now suddenly it almost starts speaking like you and me. And I'm leaving aside the whole issue
mm.
about cloning you altogether. That's a different issue altogether. But as you said, absolutely agreed. It becomes very human-like, and the problem only increases from here on out.
Yeah, would have higher requirements for the software or whatever tool that you use to detect to be able to identify real versus fake. Okay, but I also think on the flip side, with more mass use of AI, open AI, especially now open AI, it's way easier to just record something, record a voice instead of in the past, people mostly type the prompt, right? Now lots of people just say the prompt and let OpenAI does the job. That don't you think also start to capture more voice data, especially from
Oh,
OpenAI perspective?
absolutely.
They definitely start to collect more voice data information compared to before.
I've completely agreed. And I wouldn't even stop at OpenAI's perspective. They have definitely like opened the floodgates, as it were, to collecting or doing this and making it acceptable. The other part is how easy it is to kind of speak in different languages as well. OpenAI doesn't still process all languages properly, but vernacular languages, Chinese, Hindi, Spanish, so on and so forth, more and more people will start using that because speaking is easier than typing, honestly. Not just because speaking is just inherently easier, but also typing has grammar, this, that. A lot of people might not be still too familiar, especially in developed regions of the world. So they are collecting a huge amount of data, honestly. Hmm.
Speaking of your application in recruiting and HR space, uh,
Hmm.
could you give us some example how your technology can analyze the soft skill side and culture fit side, kind of complementing whatever the current and traditional recruiting process already captured from the resume?
Very excellent question. So one of the first things to look at is kind of what does the traditional recruitment process do? Well, it starts with the pre-screening of candidates. So let's say you have a role for a software developer or a marketing thing or this and that. You get a recruiter or you yourself put it out on LinkedIn or ZipRecruiter or some job post. Someone opens it. At best, they upload their resume, they put on a bit of a cover letter, and it's on you. That resume and cover letter barely captures any real world information. Now, you might be the inquisitive type. You might at best then go to LinkedIn or something to check out their profile. That's the most you can have. Now, Echo completely up or changes this process, right? Echo, first of all, makes the whole process very simple. From the creation of the job role, where you put in your requirements, what you're looking for, whether you want a technical focused person or a technical person with more soft skills, Echo lets you configure that. then through the same pipeline so that your flow doesn't get affected. Like you don't have to use 10 different devices or tabs or so on. You still just send out the link to the candidate, but the candidate just speaks to Echo's tool, Echo Recruiter, very naturally and uploads their resume. Now, what's happening behind the scenes is we are scoring the resume based on the actual requirements. So, whatever you put in, we are not just detecting, oh, this guy had like 4 keywords that matched and 5 keywords that did not. We are looking at how they matched. Was the candidate able to explain the terms, the technology that they said they used in correlation with the job description? That brings value. That's super powerful because now you know what you're getting. Number two, and more importantly, is the soft skills. You might have the most brilliant person technically with perfect grades, perfect technical abilities, but let's say they cannot work under stress. Let's say they cannot lead a team. What good is it to you? Like 89% of all bad hires are solely attributed to a lack of soft skills, essentially. That's a glaring issue. So you'd want to fix that. And Echo makes it very simple in a non-intrusive manner. There is a bit of a differentiation here. So the candidate just uploads their resume like normal, right? Their PDF version of their resume.
Mm-hmm.
Now the AI, when it comes to questioning the candidate, already has quote unquote read the resume. Think of the AI as an actual
Mm,
human being, but a human being who was omniscient. It knows the resume, it knows what you are looking for as the recruiter or the company. Then it asks the questions, not in a preset manner. So it's not canned like question one, two, three, four. It's entirely dynamic.
mm,
It knows what the intent is, that I want a very experienced software developer who can lead teams. Then it goes along that tangent to really go deep into their resume or their personality and then uncover the details. It's not just question one, question two, as I
mm,
said. So that is a huge differentiator for Echo. We honestly offer two options here. So one
mm,
option is we keep it simple. We call it candidate qualifier, in which we are sort of just letting the candidate do that part, upload the resume and answer a few very basic questions, but not interfering with the later part of recruitment, where the recruiter calls up the candidate and so on. But Echo Recruiter kind of goes the next step, but it, as I said, looks
mm,
much deeper. But again, we don't want to replace human beings. It is an assistive tool. So we'd rather call it as a co-pilot, and that's why we offer that modularity. Almost first part of the funnel, then the second part of the funnel, as you get narrow and
mm,
with like more specific candidates that you want to screen.
mm. Okay, now
Hmm.
imagine I was a candidate, right? And I
Hmm.
I chose to go through the process with Echo AI.
Hmm.
The first step I need to take is to upload my resume. Then your AI will ask me a few kind of preliminary questions based on my resume.
Hmm. Essentially, if like it was a technical role specifically, or if the recruiter wanted to go deeper into your resume, that's honestly up to the recruiter. Or the recruiter could have said it might
Mm,
just ask you about your availability. Are you willing to switch? Are you open to working in a diverse team? Stuff like that, for example. Or it could go
mm,
deep into your resume just to know your availability, your current status, whether you're willing to switch, stuff like that. Once that's done, it kind of jumps into the recruiter flow where it starts asking about, oh, hey, so I saw that you worked on a project at EY for like 10 years before. You led a team. Can you tell me a bit more about this process? Then, depending on your answer, your emotions displayed, right? It will dynamically ask follow-up questions. I'll give you another example. Imagine a technical interview. Let's say a candidate somehow manages to answer a technical question, a coding question, for example. Give
mm,
me the difference between polymorphism and something abstraction. But because of the emotions, the AI knows if they're anxious, they're scared, or they're like surprised or something. That also allows us to really go deep in. Because the difference between a confident candidate answering a question and an anxious candidate also shows you certain things. And that's where the value add
mm,
is at, right? Because the recruiter is not just being presented with a list of the things that matched. They're
mm,
looking, oh, so they did technically answer it, but it made them unnerved, or they could not answer the
mm,
follow-up, which indicates
mm,
that they might not be as good as they say, even though they have the experience. Alternatively, another thing might be they weren't technically as good, but they showed excellent leadership or management skills. These are things you would not get unless you spent like 1 2 hours with the candidate. And how would you do
mm,
that for thousands and thousands of candidates or applicants? That's where it
mm.
comes in essentially.
But during all this process, would recruiter as a real human being present or not?
No, the recruiter kind of puts it out there once the process is done at every part of the process. So it could be the candidate qualifier thing, where it's just resume upload and basic screening. Then the recruiter can see the answers. Then the recruiter chooses if they want to talk to those candidates themselves. So let's say your list of 1,000 applicants gets down to 500 or something. You filter out all the people who are unavailable, whose resumes don't match at all, that gets thrown out. Now the
Mm,
recruiter has two options. They manually speak, which is still a lot. Let's say 500 people is a lot of people to speak to. Or they say, okay, I want to go deeper. Let Echo Recruiter do another round. Echo Recruiter then does the more detailed screening. Then you go down from 500 to more than likely probably 50 at best, or even lower. Because Echo Recruiter's job is to kind of really narrow it down almost as a human would. We don't throw anyone away. We rank order the candidates and all that. But the recruiter basically gets the short list. And of course, if they want to look
mm,
at the 500th candidate, they still can. We are fully open about it. But they
right.
get to basically have the best candidates at a glance.
All right. Okay. So what you just explained makes a lot of
Hmm.
sense when it comes to soft skills, such as leadership,
Hmm.
how nervous they are, whether they are confident,
Hmm.
whether they are able to express the ideas clearly, accurately, even though they might have the tech expertise, but sometimes they cannot articulate it. So that makes a lot of sense. How about culture fit? What are the
Right.
concrete examples when Eco AI can support or can improve kind of the identification of culture fits between a candidate and a company?
That's another very interesting thing that we do and very different to what anyone else is doing. So Echo basically, when you are setting up the job role, again, let's just imagine I am the recruiter. I know my culture is that of a startup, super high pace. There is no guarantee that we'd survive. We might go unicorn, we might not. Those are all variabilities. So I put that in as a recruiter, simply just that. And I just tell the AI that, hey, look, these are the things that I care for. These are the non-negotiables. You figure out the rest. It literally is like that. You're done. Now you send it out to the candidate. The candidate now actually gets asked questions based on the actual company. So it's not just a generic software role. It's not just a generic marketing role. The AI knows the company. The AI also knows the role. And potentially the AI also knows the leadership. Like it might know me or Adam in case of Echo. So when the candidate speaks, it will ask questions in a nice way, of course, not like just
Mm,
abruptly, but in a nice way to
mm,
really ensure that the candidate shows the correct kind of culture requirements that would be needed for them to work in Echo. They might be excellent, but if the AI sees something like they are just kind of breaking under pressure, it will detect that.
mm,
It will let me as the recruiter know, and it will also kind of ask them questions. Like, hey, take a breather, relax. There's no
mm.
need to get anxious, stuff like that. But that's how we do it essentially, the company culture fit.
Excellent tech indeed. I'm sure from recruiter perspective, Eco AI going to provide a lot of support. I mean, that's probably your target user base as well.
Hmm.
But would you
Mhm.
say it becomes easier for the candidate or harder for the candidate to stand out in the process?
Absolutely easier. I'll speak to this actually from a different perspective, right? As I said on the onset, I'm a lot younger. I still remember my college days when I was like mass applying to jobs, trying to get something while building my own startups back in the day. And I know the case in developing countries, especially as opposed to US or Europe, there are legitimately thousands and thousands of applications per job role, and no one gets anything basically. At the end of the day, it's still like 5, 10 people that get hired if you're lucky and the job is for a lot of people. So in that situation, just going through the Echo Recruiter process alone, number one, does not make you or leave you feeling like you put in your resume and into the black hole. Nothing happened. This gives you feedback at the very least,
Mm,
and it's an interactive process. So at the very least, if nothing else, number one, you get to learn about your soft skills, your weaknesses, and so on. So it's almost like a practice session in the worst situations, right? On the flip side, you're also getting your reports, so you're able to work on yourself. You can improve certain things where you
so
messed
your
up.
report goes two-way. You send to the recruiter, but
Mhm.
you also send to each candidate.
Essentially, I will clarify one thing for the sake of transparency here. We let the decision or we let the recruiter decide on whether to send it to the candidate or not, because
Okay.
some recruiters obviously might not allow it. So we leave it up to the recruiter. That's not Echo's sort of decision to make. One last comment here as well, in terms of making it easy for candidates, it's 24/7. You're getting proctored, you're getting recorded, and all of that. So there's not really a lot of ways you can cheat. But at the same time, you're not like dependent on time zones, this, that. You can take it at the convenience of your time, your home, your flexibility anytime you want. So by default,
Mm.
that also is a huge time saver, actually.
Okay, so my second question would be
Hmm.
If you have all this kind of infrastructure that helps candidates to kind
Hmm.
of getting job opportunities all the time, 24/7, then
Hmm.
what if your AI makes a mistake? What if through your evaluation process, you actually cut off some great candidates, but maybe not good appearance in front of the camera, for example? I would say nervousness might be a natural behavior of human when they face a bit of pressure, but
Hmm.
facing pressure is not always a bad thing. What if you just
Hmm.
eliminate that people out of this nervousness, but that person indeed has a very good technical expertise. I might have other advantages as well, but you kind of just eliminate them based on the AI results.
Number one, we do not, because the model was trained on such a diverse data pool. So for what it's worth, we are not cutting anyone off based on their appearance. Now you're right, the AI can make mistakes. So that's why we make it a distinct point that our AI does not make that final choice in terms of cutting anyone off. If you'll remember, as I was saying, if there is 500 candidates ultimately screened, or 1,000 or 20,000, you still get every single one of them with a justification for every point on which they got scored. The recruiter ultimately shortlists and they decide. So we strongly believe in the human side of it. We are not out to replace the humans. We are just giving them more information. So instead of imagine the resume only, we are giving you this full detailed analysis on top of it. So the recruiter makes that choice. We assist them in making that choice. And we provide AI explanations, which is another unique thing, right? It's not just a blanket score. Like, let's say I scored 78% in my technical ability. No, it'll point to like, I spoke about X, Y, and Z, which means this,
Mm,
and based on your requirements, this fits. But the other thing was a bit iffy. Not only did they show nervousness, but they could not explain it properly either. Now you decide ultimately at the end of the day. Like as a recruiter, are you okay with that or are you not? So that's how we essentially
mm,
make sure, like, or at least as much as we can, that we
mm,
never cut anyone off. It's
mm.
ultimately the recruiter who decides.
Right. Um, Essentially, it's a recruiter who will make the decision. But however, I
Hmm.
feel like the results is strongly suggestive, right? You put the data in front of the recruiter, it still
Hmm.
guides them towards certain direction. So yeah, it will still have the directional kind of unintended results. That's pretty much for sure.
To a degree, I mean, every bit of like analysis that you do, even if it were simple ATS scores, right, that's insanely suggestive. And in any capacity, that's worse than at least what we are doing. Because a simple ATS score just looks at if your resume is in Times New Roman, it's like a 12 font across the board. It's the exact same formatting. That's why if you type in resume in Google right now, every single recommended resume looks the same. Otherwise, you're just not getting through the pre-screener. So Echo by default, number one does better than that. But you're right. It's still a bunch of scores, no matter how much we try to explain it. At some capacity, even as we get better, there might be mistakes. So that's the reason, essentially, again, we try to give as much justification as we can for every point that we score. And number two, still, the recruiter it is recommended that they go through the candidates. But again, it's on them if they decide to like totally cut off the last, like, let's say 500 candidates and not even bother looking at them. But again, the good thing is like the resume is broken down separately, their voice skills are broken down separately, their visual appearance is broken down separately, whether they had a cluttered, messy room versus a clean background, so on and so forth. So just that I feel like helps. But again, there are possibilities of mistakes happening, and we try to do as much as we can to make sure that does not happen.
Wonderful. Okay, cool. Now I want to
Hmm.
talk a little bit about the financial situation of ACO. So if I'm not
Hmm.
mistaken, I think your startup is bootstrapped, right? You never raised external
Yes.
funding. Is that correct?
Hmm. That is correct.
Okay. I in the past came across a lot of small enterprises. I would not even call them startup because they are essentially not VC fundable because they might be a very successful business, but they are not really a startup kind of pose for exponential growth. Often they choose to not go for VC funding. But per my understanding, ACO is actually very VC fundable. Has great potential to scale exponentially. So why not seeking external funding? Was that an intentional choice? How did that happen?
Two parts essentially. So right now we are technically looking for funding. We are raising. But
Mm,
just because of the market conditions right now, two things happened. Essentially, after the boom of the COVID days, VC money genuinely dried up a lot. You'll hear a lot of buzz
mm,
about it on social media, but having been on those calls, it's difficult. And the requirement in terms of revenue as opposed to just technology has increased exponentially. Because back in the day, what would happen is that even if you had a barely functioning MVP, it depended on like the founder's vision, and that was pretty much it to at least secure the pre-seed. Whereas now we have a completely fully functioning product, but just because we can't show a large enough revenue, that has become a challenge. So the conscious decision on our part was that first we need to scale it up to a point where the VC does not complain about the fact that hey, you guys haven't raised like XYZ in monthly recurring revenue or total month trailing revenue. And now we are starting to get there, building up to that, and our like sales pipeline up and all that. So that is what is making us now obviously go to the VCs because money is definitely something every startup requires, especially as we are growing. The team, the infrastructure, marketing is another huge thing for a tool like this. So you got to reach out to as many people. So we are indeed fundraising now or trying to.
uh, how big is your team now? Is you fully relying on your own revenue?
Hmm. So the company does rely primarily through Adam's kind of sources right now, so
Okay.
bootstrapped through him. Um, and the team is mostly like, for example, there's at least 5 people that are practically full time, right?
Mm,
Other people are interns, but definitely even being interns, they put in a lot of time, like even being college students or masters or bachelors. So I'd almost consider them like 3/4 full time for what it's worth. But again, you still have to pay them salaries. Like equity can only go so far, right? So those are the things. And again, we are pretty solid in terms of infrastructure credits. We work with multiple cloud partners, so that has gotten better over the months. But one is payments, one is like salaries and stuff like that. The other is just marketing. That's another huge area where you need experienced folks. Like our team is so technical. We need more marketing related people to come in and take this
mm,
idea to the market and sell it to people. Like again, different folks are better at different things. So that's the reason. Those are the set of reasons.
mm. Do you have any revenue now?
We have a very limited amount of revenue right now. We are closing in on
Okay.
around 10K.
Okay. Okay. It's still remarkable. I mean, a 4 years old startup with about 5 to 6 full-time team member, and you have been fully rely on bootstrapping. That's quite
Hmm.
impressive, I would say. Okay, cool. I remember Adam also mentioned that um, he used to have a trouble, kind of
Hmm.
came across a leadership challenge with a C-level
Hmm.
partner. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. So I wonder if that type of C-level partner challenge, have you tried to use your own voice AI product to analyze that before you engage that partner? Because seems it turned out to be not a successful partnership engagement.
Yes. So first of all, actually, let me walk a few steps back. We've had some, not problems, I'd say more like a divergence of opinions with one or two people. And throughout the years, we definitely have used our own technology to filter them. So while there were certain flags, we kind of chose to go ahead because the other side of it is honestly, if you're really looking at the higher tier of people with better scores, how do you pay them 200K a year, for example? So you
Mm,
kind of settle
mm,
for people who are like willing to work pro bono or something like that for the time being. So we
mm,
went with that choice just based on our like internal requirements at that point. But that would be kind of the answer. Mhm. And I'll just add to this. I suppose in terms of my opinions and how I choose to kind of deal with it, that's definitely a huge issue, right? Particularly when you're dealing with C level, it's different because it almost becomes a collaborative platform. It's an area where
mm,
something a lot more like it's not hard science, but like vision arises. It's very subjective. So you really need someone who has the same sort of work ethic as you, believes in the same vision, and is like I'm not resistant to change, obviously not. We almost went through a soft pivot with the whole recruiter thing compared to where we were before. We were doing a huge report, we turned it into an actual application. But we can't, on one side, like we can't have someone who decides to upheaval the whole process because that's 4 years of work and you just can't change it in a day. At the same time, it needs to be someone who kind of has still like changes to suggest, has work that they can put in, and it's like a malleable process throughout. So that's where I see like the whole subjectivity of vision and implementation becomes very critical. Even personal things like how well you kind of mesh with that person, no matter how much screening you do, that you only honestly find out once you start speaking and working with them on a day-to-day basis. The screening is a filter essentially for knowing like, okay, this guy, and we have seen that these guys speak super well, are very motivated, but like technically or implementation wise, maybe falls short, right? And that again gets proven. It's almost in a way what the result predicted, but like here we are.
Um, Being part of the founding team of the company,
Hmm.
I often heard others saying that early hires matters even more
Hmm.
than later hires because now your company is really small. What is your take on the traits of early employees should have? For example, when it comes to eco AI.
Okay, so I have some pretty strong feelings about this. Being a technical guy, I believe technical skills come almost last. It's
Hmm.
adaptability to tech that matters. It's a background in tech that definitely matters. And I'm just speaking for the tech part first. But the most critical thing is an ability to work under pressure, to be super, super, super flexible, and to be open to challenges and implementing things in a different way. If you want to design a 500 service microservice architecture in a startup, it's never going to fly. You're going to be building your product for 60 years at that rate. You can't do that. You can't pay like 20 different bills to 20 different providers. So you have to make do with what you have, and you have to do it quick. And you have to be open to change and feedback. You can't be too hung up on your own ideas. Those are the critical things I think are super, super, super important to me when I'm looking at founding engineers or founding people. The one other thing I'd say is almost some level of leadership skill, because that's one of the biggest differences I've seen from someone who's from an entrepreneurial background versus someone who's more used to a sort of like corporate lifestyle. In a startup, it's very difficult that I send this to my product manager who then sends it to their sub commander or something. They go out with the like tickets or something. It just does not fly in the startup. You would want to do that, but there's not enough bandwidth if you spend time like
You often
organizing
are
Jira tickets.
alone. Yeah.
Yes. So if your engineers are kind of waiting for the Jira ticket to come in and doing exactly what they're told, that doesn't fly. So they need to be flexible and almost be leaders in their own capacity. Like understand the vision and work on it. Those are the important things I'd say above technical skills that are very critical.
Would you prefer the people who have worked in startups before, or they accumulated their experience from corporate side before?
Oh, easily startups, because
Mm.
corporate brings with it an hefty amount of, I'd say, like inflexibility to a degree, right? Again, I'm not saying it's bad. It's perfectly fine. But the problem is in corporate, you get used to certain things. I mean, I'd love to have like a list of to-dos given to me, and that's all I do. But that just doesn't fly in a startup. Again, not good or bad. It's just how the structure and resources end up playing out in the grand scheme of things. Someone who's worked with a startup knows that challenge, right? So for them to kind of mesh into an environment like this, where there's no like 6 p.m. stand-up call, there's no like fixed time for reporting, that flows better. So that's my take on it.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Okay, finally, I know we often ask all our guests some advices for aspiring founders. So, what is your
Mhm.
advice for aspiring founders on leveraging existing technologies instead of reinventing the wheel? Because that is often the case. A lot of startups they
Mhm.
are not really reinventing something groundbreaking, but often leverage existing ones. What is your advice on that?
A lot of people get really somehow triggered when people use OpenAI or other AI service providers to build products, right? Just think about it for a second. But what they're doing is honestly in a way smart. They're not choosing to reinvent the wheel. They're trying to find a problem that exists and use a technology that is already there to solve that issue. And I really cannot understand what the problem is with that. They're succeeding. They're solving a problem. And if you really want to reinvent the wheel, it actually gets to the point of like, okay, did you invent your own computer on which you're coding? No, you did not. You're using someone else's built technology. You're using in the internet. You're using this and that. So why is it so that suddenly this has become a problem that you're almost expected to reinvent the wheel? That is something I see and it also bothers me. So definitely wherever you can, it's almost adapting the wheel to different use cases is the smartest thing you can do, especially when you try to validate it against a market. So you're trying to like find a solution to a genuine problem. Speak to people, try to see what their problems are. They'll tell you way more than anything you can ever dream of, right? They'll literally tell you what their problems are. Then build a MVP, go back to them. It really doesn't matter what technology you use. I genuinely believe that. If they say they like it, there you have a case study. Go to the next client, go to the next client, and eventually you can start making money and reaching a broader audience. And the tech is almost like the hammer, right? It's about hanging the picture on the wall. It's not about which brand of hammer, putting together the iron piece and the wooden piece. It really is about hanging the picture. That is what matters, is how I'll put it.
What's the future plan for Echo AI? Has it ever occurred to your mind or the team's mind that expands the application of voice AI into some other areas going forward?
Actually, yes. And incidentally, Echo almost started more along that tangent, right? As I said, we almost did a soft pivot where we found the market here way more appealing because of market metrics, obviously, and our technology could fit in. So going back to your original question, mental health is one of the biggest areas we focus on. First I'll cover and the other area, lie detection, is also super interesting because as I said, it's already a part of our recruiting package, even deepfake detection. So whether it's me pretending to be you on an interview call or you using your AI cloned voice to answer questions you don't know the answers to, we try to detect that. So that small bit of technology is kind of rolled in. But as you said, that has an immense set of applications outside, detectives, police, this and that. So that's just one. And mental health particularly, because that's an area the whole team I feel feels strongly about. It's an intrusive process. A lot of people don't have the money or the resources to actually go to a therapist or even know that they have issues. So if we can use someone's voice, not just English, language out there, to at least give them a hint about their problems, that we strongly believe in and is something we are actively working towards. We recently had decent success with binary prediction of depression. We are working on validating now. We even have a small app that we put out to people. We have had about 100, 200 participants as of yet who are testing it out, putting together their like voice results against a standardized clinical test. The challenge here though is for a thing like mental health is honestly, which we are too fast on before. Like everyone makes mistakes. So what we learned is that you can't really move super fast on this because the like threshold for mistake or the barrier is super low. You have to be super critical. You have to triple, quadruple validate it against existing sources. So that's why we are taking it a bit slower compared to our recruiting process and so on and so forth.
Wonderful. That closes our
Mhm.
session today. And thank you so much for sitting with me today.